Good evening and welcome to the Get Football Mercato show. Here every weekday to bring you the latest transfer news from across France, Germany, and Italy. I'm your host, Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Andrew Thompson from Get German Football News, Rich Allen from Get French Football News, and Paolo Mangone from Di Marzio will be joining us a little bit later on. Stuck on some transfer news at the moment, so we will join him in a little while. But on to the news from today, and starting with something that broke just after the podcast last night, Andrew, and that's Thorgan Hazard potentially on the move with a number of clubs interested. Both AS Roma and Sevilla are the named teams, at least, in Mönchengladbach looking for at least 20 million euros. Could at least one of the Hazard brothers be on the move this summer?
It's possible. Obviously, I think obviously it's easier to capture Thorgan than in regards to Gladbach. They have quite a few. I mean, we've said there's a few teams in Germany. There's a lot of wide player options that Dieter Hecking has at his disposal. Fabian Johnson, Patrick Herrmann is fit again, Jonas Hoffmann, Ibrahima Traore, and a few others. So if they're looking to strengthen other areas and potentially use that transfer fee received for Thorgan and putting it somewhere else, maybe in another sort of forward, maybe a defensive replacement, that money will be served well. But I don't think he's forced to leave. I do think Roma is a pretty sizable jump for him from Gladbach. I thought he did quite well last season as well. But in regards to the promise he showed coming through when he was in Belgium, I don't think he's reached the heights that some would expect. I remember one time, a long time ago, Eden Hazard actually said that Thorgan is actually better than him in regards to just straight ability. I don't think we've seen that from him, but I think right now, considering the business that Roma has already done, I don't know why he would necessarily go to Roma. I think Sevilla would make a better fit. That said, who knows if Sevilla would play a brand of football that would be suited to him ideally, but they do have history of getting the best out of wingers in the past. So if he does move, I mean, I think for me, La Liga might suit him a little bit better as well, given the kind of player he is. Very technically gifted, very direct. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on it, but I think he can go either way right now, obviously. He's not forced to move, but if he feels like he's ready for the jump, then I think Sevilla would be a good club.
It's the interesting one really for Hazard at the moment, because he's had a good couple of seasons at Gladbach. At the same time, he's never quite pushed onto the level that maybe some expected from that loan spell initially. But at the same time, as that, Gladbach haven't quite advanced in the way that maybe he had hoped. Maybe sort of a move at this moment not only benefits Gladbach from a financial point of view, bringing other players, but also helps the Belgian maybe further his career a little bit more in terms of his aspirations of European football, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's already 25 now. He's been around for a while, like Eden, so people would assume he would be a little bit younger. But that is a fair point. Historically, the last 5 or 6 seasons, when you look past Bayern Munich, the competition for European places is very close in the Bundesliga, and Gladbach had a handful of solid seasons, particularly when Granit Xhaka and Mahmoud were still at the club, but they haven't really kicked on. So it's a fair suggestion to make that maybe if he's looking for more opportunities in Europe itself, moving on from the club would make sense. But then again, last season there was some promise around Gladbach, in the season again, they are showing signs of progression. They, again, as I mentioned the last time I was on, they have quite a few good young players that they can build a nice core around to kick on for in the next couple seasons. So if he does wait around, he might reap the benefits, but it also could fall flat, and then he might miss his chance for a better move. So I guess I think it can go either way, but one way or the other, I wouldn't be shocked if he stayed or if he left.
It's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on, especially Roma, especially is still looking for a winger after that Malcolm incident. On to things in France with you, Rich, and we've had a move finally, really in the right direction. It seems like a lot of movement has been out of France, but we have a signing of sorts. It's Timothy Kolodziak. He's been joining Saint-Etienne, the former fullback of Nice. Obviously, has sort of gone around the clubs in the last couple of years, having been at Sevilla, Gladbach in Germany briefly, and then Tigres more recently. What do you think to this deal for the Lever? They're slowly building a new squad under new management and the new style that they're going for. Is this the right kind of signing for them?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I think that you look at the centre back pairing that they closed the season with last season with Perrin and Subotic. They're two hugely experienced defenders, but question marks over age, especially with Perrin and maybe injury concerns with certainly Subotic. So I think to bring someone like him in it's a good move. We know that from his time with Nice, he was a solid player, got the move to Sevilla, had a couple of really solid seasons with them, was part of the first team, won the Europa League, fell out of favour, and from then on, the last couple of years, I think have been quite a struggle for him. Difficult to really, I think, to perhaps put on exactly why, but never really nailed down any kind of starting role in Germany. Similar in Mexico with Tigres. So it's a good move. I mean, we saw last season with as I say, with the signing of Subotic, with the signing of Mvia, that Saint-Etienne are starting to become sort of canny players in the transfer market. They can spot when a great deal's to be had, and certainly Mvia and Subotic were two prime examples of that. Perhaps fallen out of favour or slightly fallen on harder times, out of form maybe, and sort of slightly forgotten. Brought them in, nurtured them, got them playing well, and they now look excellent players. And I hope the same. I hope the same here, because he's we know that he is a good player, and I hope that he can get a starting role, or certainly a more regular football with Saint-Etienne, because I think if he can get that confidence back, get that match fitness back, I think he'll prove to be a really, really good signing.
And that's the interesting one, really, isn't it, Rich? Because they've lost two right backs this summer, really. Pierre Gabriel going to Monaco in the end, and Saidi Yanko also leaving the club. So it's a big hole to fill. We think he's got the quality for it, but at the same time, do they maybe still need one or two more really in that kind of position to give him some competition, given the lack of football he's had over the last sort of 12 to 18 months?
I think they do. I think one thing to bear in mind is that although we saw him play fullback at Nice quite often, he didn't really play that role with Sevilla. He was part of a centre back pair in there, moved inside with Tremolinas playing outside of him at left back. So I mean, if they are going to put him there, then it's potentially a risky move. It opens up a little bit of rustiness there. They may want to revert to a back three, and I think that actually could be a great way of getting the best out of him. It might aid with covering maybe the sort of lack of pace of Subotic and Perrin. So maybe that's a role that Gassier is going to look to go down. I'm as I say, this is a move I'm really on paper. It's a move that should work out. As I said, he is a really, really good player, but he is obviously out of form. He's out of confidence. He's out of match sharpness. But the same could be said for Yann Mvia when they signed him, and look how what a great 6 months he had with Saint-Etienne. So there's your example, I think, for Saint-Etienne to look at, that they can actually bring in these kind of players who, as I say, have perhaps been slightly forgotten, but bring them in, get them playing well, and really make it an excellent move for all parties.
It's going to be an interesting one indeed to follow. On to news in Italy, and we do have Paolo from Di Marzio joining us now. Thank you for joining us, Paolo. Obviously, transfer news always comes first at this time of year, and it looked like you've got a bit of an update for Luka Modric, so I want to go on that very quickly first. seen our Twitter feed report on the news as well. What was the latest in that potential move for Inter for the Croatian?
It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. The latest reports is that Inter is waiting for a meeting to happen between Florentino Perez and Modric before anything concrete develops.
That's going to be an interesting move as it develops, at least anyway, because it could be a great move for Inter Milan. But on to the main news, really, we want to do, Paolo, because it's been the big story in Italy for the last couple of weeks. I know, obviously, maybe eventually overshadowed by the Ronaldo news, heaven forbid. But the Milan Juve deal looks to be almost all but done, and news that Higuain's heading to Milan this evening for his medical tomorrow. It's inching ever so closer. Does it feel quite real yet that this move is actually happening?
It's starting to feel real. Strange to see, two great players to go to Milan, but it's honestly, I think Milan has gotten the better deal here. They've solved their striking problems, and now they have really a star forward, and they've got another young center back to play along Romagnoli. I think Milan is the clear winners in this deal on the sporting level, but I think Juventus won because I think this deal is going to solve their financial fair play problems.
This is the interesting one, really, for both clubs. A lot of people are saying that Milan feel like the winners in this deal, but at the same time, Juventus are thinking in the here and now, and Leonardo Bonucci represents a player that they know well, that fits it well in their system, and at the same time, enhances at least their short-term ambitions of, while they have the Portuguese maestro, of winning that Champions League, doesn't it?
It does, but the thing is that will you put by putting all your eggs in one basket by winning now? What happens if they fail to win? That's the Armageddon scenario that they face now. They put all the pressure to win now, and if it doesn't happen, what happens next? No one will know.
That will be the interesting thing to keep following, depending on if that move does sort of go through. On to news, more of a roundup news, at least anyway, of our nations at the moment. And let's start with Germany. Andrew, in this a little bit quieter than it was last night, at least anyway. But there's some interesting moves potentially with. We'll start with RB Leipzig with Emil Forsberg. It looks like there's a number of clubs obviously been interested in the past. There's rumoured interest now with AS Roma. What can you tell us about it?
I almost feel like it's just easy to link Roma with attacking players right now, given some of the business that we may have seen from them. But I wouldn't put too much stock in it currently. If you look at what they have done, they brought in Justin Kluivert from Ajax, and he's at that age now where he needs to be playing, and he did brilliantly in Eredivisie, and he needs to kick on from that. So I don't understand why, if they would bring in a left winger in Kluivert, why they would bring in the left-sided player in Forsberg after that. I know depth is always nice to have, especially when Europe's involved. But I do think they have a fair few attacking players. Well, and Stefan Hashawari is also at the club still, and he's also one left-sided attacking player. So I don't think there's much in it personally. And in seasons past, Forsberg has made it known that I think he'd prefer move to Spain or move to the Premier League. I don't think much is in this, honestly, but anything is obviously possible. Leipzig have shown that, and even though they're trying to establish themselves as a regular contestant in the Champions League via qualification to the Bundesliga, that they'll still sell players if they get enough money, and they'll just recycle and buy younger and keep those players on. So if he does leave, I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't think it'll be to Roma, though.
That's the interesting thing about this kind of deal, because we've mentioned the amount of players they have in those positions, especially if Ademola Lookman looks like he's coming in, Andrew, as well. Do you think that, despite that, Forsberg, out of those attacking players, is the one that Leipzig would miss the most, especially with his creativity?
It would really depend. The first year up, he did quite well. You could say the thing about Timo Werner as well, Marcel Sabitzer and players like that. But last season, he had a down year. I don't know if they would necessarily miss him the most, but he certainly offers a bit of creativity in wider areas, and he's a versatile player. Even though he's predominantly attacking from the left, he can play Central quite well. He suits the system. You would assume that usually Nagelsmann will want to work with him when he comes to the club after this coming season. But again, let's just say they're not short of attacking options. Most of those attacking options they do have are flexible and they can operate in multiple roles. They also brought in Emre Aslan from the under-19s, which is another left-sided player. Bruma is still at the club. He's young. He's a left-sided player. As you mentioned, Lookman might be coming in. In a pinch, Timo Werner can play on the left. Same thing with Jean-Kevin Augustin. So there are players that can fill that void for him. And Forsberg is about to hit those prime playing years. And like I said, even though Leipzig are positioning themselves for trying to challenge Bayern and the bigger clubs and trying to get Champions League regularly, he might want to move on. The club will step up. So again, much like Thorgan Hazard, if he moved, it wouldn't be surprising. But I still don't think Roma makes sense for the move. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does move.
Let's keep an eye on where the Swede might move on to a player that looks like he's not going to move this summer, but they might be more advanced moves for him next summer, and that's Christian Pulisic. He has been rumoured with Liverpool being the big club that's been linked with him, Andrew, but it looks like he's staying for the time being, but that contract situation means that this time next year, they might be interested in moving on the American.
Well, if you listen to Rafa Honigstein yesterday, basically point blank he said if contract negotiations don't progress this season, he will be sold next season because they don't want a situation where it comes down to his final year. He could potentially go on a Bosman or a very reduced transfer fee that they want. They want to be have that the price of a player recouped sufficiently enough. So I do think he will go next summer. I think we talked about it last week. We mentioned Pulisic briefly. And I did say that I would not be surprised if he did move on. I think he'll end up in the Premier League, not just because there will be a lot of suitors, but more or less because the Premier League is the biggest league that is viewed in the United States, and that's a marketing dream for whatever club picks him up, and most likely that's why you see those links with Liverpool. They are owned by an American conglomerate. You have to imagine that there will be interest in Mohamed Salah again if he has another brilliant season. So if he was to be moved on, then you could just replace him with Pulisic, who's a more or less like-for-like player. That business for them would make sense. In terms of for Dortmund, it would also make sense from the standpoint that they have an overload of attacking players, none of whom seem to be leaving. Marco Reus has always been linked with a move away from the club, but he's stayed loyal to the club. Again, they brought in Maximilian Philip. Jadon Sancho came on quite well, and he developed. Jacob Brun-Larsen came back from his loan, and he's in line for more increased time, according to Lucien Favre. So, again, there are players there that they can just replace Pulisic with in-house, and they wouldn't necessarily have to panic to go out and buy a replacement. They can put that money elsewhere. So I do think next summer he will be moving on, and he'll be 20 by then. So I think in terms of his career, I think it might be a little bit too soon, but I can see the allure of why he'd want to do it. So I think we should expect that at this point.
Yeah, it would be surprising for someone with his kind of ambition, and obviously the pull of being American. I'm sure plenty of American owners would like him under their umbrella. On to the final bit of news, and it involves RB Leipzig again, in for another Bayern Munich player, another midfielder as well. We've talked about a few of them this summer, looking maybe for the exit door. But Sebastian Rudy, is that one a likely one? It feels like maybe that's one that Bayern do want to try and keep.
I think they would want to keep him, but the link makes sense. Again, with Nagelsmann coming into the club next season, he'll have worked with Rudi at Hoffenheim, so he'll know the player quite well. And again, they just lost Naby Keita, so at the moment, when you look at their central options, they're really kind of missing that type of player that Rudi is. He's can play central midfield. He's combative, can play deeper, but he's also deeper from in the creative sense, and that's the thing that they're lacking. They have good ball winners in Diego Demi and Stefan Ilsanker, and then but the rest of the options are more forward-thinking players that like to get on. So Rudi to Leipzig does make sense, but I don't. Rudi also suits Niko Kovac's style of play, his system that he employed at Eintracht Frankfurt. So if it's something he wants to emulate at Bayern, I would imagine he would want to keep Specialty. But that's sad. I don't know if the playing time is going to be there. Bayern haven't really moved any of their central options. Arturo Vidal's still there. Thiago Alcantara is still there. So this just might be in line with just him wanting more minutes, keeping his place in the national team fold. And if it comes down to that, then I can see the move. But again, one of those things where there's no pressure either way. It's just going to be up to the player. If he feels like he's not getting the minutes at Bayern, then I can understand him wanting to move on, given he's getting up there in age now. So this could be his last move before his last bigger contract. So.
And it'd be interesting to see what Leipzig want to do in that midfield now. Naby Keita is no longer there. On to things in France, and there's some interesting news slowly hotting up again in Liga and Rich. And we'll start with a player I know both of us quite like it, although he didn't quite have as good a season last season. In Christophe Julian of Toulouse, potentially. We're reporting tonight that a number of German clubs are interested with him, along with English side Southampton, who have been mentioned with him a number of times before. Does it feel like the right time for the 25-year-old to move on after what was a bit of a lackluster second season in France?
Yeah, I mean, he'll see. There was some off-field troubles. I think that he was captain start of the season. I think there were some issues that went on behind the scenes. He was dropped for a few games, captaincy taken off him and given to Issa Diop. But he regained his spot. You're right. I don't think he hit the form of the previous season by any means. But same can be said for the entire Toulouse squad. I think for him as a player, yes, it is the right time to move, and I think perhaps I could see him easily back in Germany. Could easily see him in the Premiership. I think he's that kind of defender. I think that could work out very well for a sort of mid-table side. I think the only thing that's going to prevent any move here is Toulouse. I think they've obviously lost Alban Lafont, although they replaced him with Baptiste René. I think was a very good move. They haven't yet replaced Diop. I think to lose Julien as well, I think they're going to want at least a replacement for Diop first before they even consider selling Julien, unless they've gone crackers, because it would seem a crazy move to let both of your first choice centre backs from. I mean, it's the past 2 seasons they formed a great partnership together. To lose them both and at the minute not have a replacement lined up would seem crazy. So I think the only thing that's going to prevent Julien moving out of Toulouse is Toulouse themselves, because it wouldn't add up, I think, for them to lose an experienced player. It's a very young squad that Toulouse have got. So I think to lose someone of the experience of Julien would be a huge blow if they haven't got something lined up, that brings equal experience into the team.
Especially when you start thinking, like you said, Rich, that they've already lost Diop to West Ham, and having another player like that go with the experience gap, it was going to be maybe a torrid season for them if that were to happen. But on to another defender that might be coming to Liga and shores, and that's Jerome Boateng. We've spoken about him a few times before. It looks like at the moment, at least, there's still a little bit of a gap between the valuations between Paris Saint-Germain and Bayern Munich, supposedly around about 10 million euros still separating them. But would the German be a good addition to this defensive lineup that at times last season, yes, they romped the league, but at the same time, the defensive partnerships never quite lived up to expectation?
I find this one a really tough one, because logically, yeah, it should work out. He's a strong defender. He's had consistently good season after season with Bayern in Germany. Bags of experience. So on that side of things, yes, it should be a no-brainer for PSG to bring him in. I then balance that up with, is he going to be another player that's just coming for the sort of glitz and glamour that PSG bring? We know he's got that side of him. We know that he can be quite easily distracted with things away from the pitch. So that's my only concern is PSG have over the last few seasons have always gone for the sort of glamour signings, without necessarily addressing the issues that they need to be addressing, and they are completely correct to be going after a centre back. I do think, especially if they're going to be playing three at the back, which it almost seems certain that they will this season, they're going to need at least one other centre back to join the group. I'm just concerned that Boateng is going to find himself distracted with the whole sort of Neymar show that goes on at PSG. There's one or two other players that perhaps that fall into that category as well, and I just wonder: are there players that can bring everything that Boateng brings on the pitch without any of those worries or concerns away from it, or those losses, loss of concentration? We saw it at the World Cup, the sort of loss of concentration, and perhaps lack of discipline in somewhat. So it's a really tough one. It's a tough one. You'll get many PSG fans will be saying, "Yeah, of course, bring him in. He's a World Cup winning defender. He's got so much experience, brings this, that, and the other." But I think just to look at it from the slightly bigger picture, I think, could they perhaps have gone after someone else? And I know the question would be who, but it is a really difficult one, I think. But no doubt PSG will bring him in. No doubt he'll have a pretty good season. But I just have concerns over the attitude that he would bring with him, and whether that's actually going to help what's already. What we already know is it's a bit of an issue with PSG behind the scenes, is that attitude problem of all these players that are coming in, glitz, glamour, etc. So that's my only concern, I think, on that Boateng deal. But it'll be interesting to see if that comes off, and then how he works then with Thomas Tuchel.
It'll be an interesting one indeed, because he can be a really great defender, but an awful World Cup really didn't do anything in standing wise. On to a slightly smaller move, and it involves Toulouse again, at least trying to reinforce themselves after that sort of poor season and having to go through the playoff in the end. And that is that they look like they're bringing in wide man Mathieu Dossevi from Metz, who had a decent season last season. Rich, would he be the right kind of player to add to them? He had a boatload of assists, but is there anyone on the end to score them for Toulouse?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, they've lost Andy Delors. I mean, I know he didn't hit the back of the net often last season, but you just feel we saw with Metz last season the brilliant link up between Dossevi and Nolan Roux. And it almost secured Ligue 1 status for Metz. Just those two players alone, the goals of Roux, the assists of Dossevi. Don't forget, only two players registered more assists in the league last season than Dossevi, and that was Dimitri Payet and Neymar. So it's not as though he's and I don't think he perhaps has the finishers and the additional quality around him of those two. So he really did have an excellent season. He'll bring, he brings a bit of pace down that right wing. He'll bring the ability to cross the ball accurately, and he'll bring experience. As we mentioned when we talked about Julien, that Toulouse team does lack quite a bit of experience. I think it's a very, very young team. Which is great. We love seeing those young players come through, but if there aren't those experienced players around them, they're not going to develop to the levels that we sort of hope that they do. So I think it would be a really, really positive move for Toulouse. It still doesn't address necessarily the biggest issues that they've got, but if they can have someone that can at least is a reliable source of assists, then maybe that will help. They've obviously got Mubele. They brought him in made him a permanent signing from a loan spell. Maybe there's a link up there. I still think they need a bit more of a target man. I'm amazed they didn't make a move for someone like Nolan Roux. To be perfectly honest, I think he would have been a great signing for them. But in terms of Dossevi, it seems a no-brainer. He's not going to be expensive. He's got Ligue 1 experience. He's got plenty of playing experience. He's got the assists. He knows what it takes to perform in this league. So it's a great move. But as you say, they just need to make sure they've got someone at the end of all those crosses.
That's still going to be the biggest worry for Laviole heading into next season. Finally, we finish in Serie A, and back to you, Paolo, with some moves that have been happening over the last sort of day or so, including those big ones we mentioned earlier. But starting with a bit of a somber one, at least anyway, in a sense that Leandro Castan has agreed with Roma to be released from his contract. He's now a free agent. It's kind of a disappointing end for what has been not a terrible career at Roma for him, but at the same time, it feels like the right move for both parties.
Yeah, it's. I remember in the 13-14 season, he was one of the best center backs in Serie A. So it's kind of sad that it has to end that way, but I think it's the best move for both parties. He can start off in the next phase of his career at a smaller club and find regular playing time.
And that was the problem for the last couple of seasons, really. He was loaned out for Sampdoria for a year. Obviously was at Cagliari for the last half of last season, but never quite hit the ground running. It looks like he's also set to join Vasco da Gama, which would be nice for him to head home and see how that can go for him. On to news that has gone through. Well, it looks like it's going through, and that's Lisandro Lopez. No, not that one. The other one, the Argentinian defender rather than striker that we all remember. Heading to Genoa, who was starting to make some moves now. Do you feel like that's the right kind of signing for a team that did struggle at times last season, didn't need to maybe shore things up to the back as much as they have brought in a striker up front yesterday? Maybe someone like Lopez can increase that back line.
No, you're right. That'll definitely add some depth to the back line. For Genoa, they struggled last year by, especially early on in the season before Balladini came in. They struggled and conceded a lot of goals under Juric. So it's definitely a right move and a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, it would be nice to see them starting to move a little bit more forward. And onto things in Napoli, at least, and they're eyeing a right back after obviously had Gulam last season, but the injury that he had near the end really helped derail the Neapolitans in the end, really. That's somewhere that Carlo Ancelotti sees as something they need to try and improve on. What kind of players are they looking to bring in?
Latest reports right now that Darmian is the favorite for the right back position, and I think he'll definitely be an increase in quality, especially over Christian Maggio, who was there last season, and after Mario Rui got injured, and now, well, before that, Fazio Gulam. So they're definitely thin on the wing back position. So Darmian brings in European experience, and that will definitely help Napoli if they do end up signing him.
They definitely need some strength and depth there, and it was all plain to see last season. Well, very quickly, Paolo, I wanted your quick thoughts again on the Modric news. I know you had a little bit of a write-up just before you headed on, but we're also hearing now that if Florentino Perez was to allow the Croatian to leave, it would be let for less than 100 million euros. Is that maybe a step too far for Inter on this dream of bringing the creative midfielder in?
Well, I've just at first glance, I don't know how Inter would be able to afford it unless they pull off some sort of loan with option to buy. But if they do end up purchasing it, I think that would throw all the work that they did for financial fair play out the window.
And that's maybe what might scupper what will look like a very exciting deal, but maybe they'll just stick with Arturo Vidal for that one. That's all that we have for this evening. My thanks to Paolo, Andrew, and Rich for their company, and all of you at home, of course, as well. Please do join us again tomorrow for more from the craziest world that is the transfer window. Good night.